Welcome. Thank you for being here live. Also, of course, when you watch the replay. I know time is precious, and the fact that you chose to spend part of your day in this conversation tells me something. You're curious, you're questioning, or you're sensing that something important is missing in how we currently talk about motherhood, work, and leadership. This is not a typical webinar. And it's also not a conversation only for mothers. So think of in what capacity you are here. Are you here to listen in as a mother, as a leader, as an HR decision maker, or any other capacity? Try to wear the different hats, because this is a very rich conversation. So today we're talking about matrescence. It's a word that is still unfamiliar to many people, yet it describes one of the most profound developmental transitions in adult life. Matrescence refers to the psychological, physical, emotional, and social transformation that occurs when a woman becomes a mother and continues as she mothers. It is often compared to adolescence, not because it is chaotic or immature, but because it is a full identity reorganization. Nothing simply returns to normal. Something new is formed. We said it in the pre-conversation here, giving birth is like being reborn for yourself. It is, despite how fundamental this transition is, it remains largely unnamed, unsupported, and misunderstood, especially in professional environments. In organizations, motherhood is still often treated as a logistical interruption, a leave, a return date, a flexibility issue. What's missing is the recognition that matrescence is a developmental process, one that reshapes priorities, perception, capacity, and leadership. So this conversation is not about whether motherhood is hard or beautiful. It is not about glorifying struggle. And it's not about lowering standards or asking for special treatment. It is about seeing clearly what actually happens during this transition and what becomes possible when it is understood rather than ignored. Because when matrescence is misunderstood, we lose talent, confidence, and leadership potential. And when it is recognized and supported, something else emerges: depth, discernment, emotional intelligence, prioritization, and a different quality of leadership. So as you listen today, I invite you not to rush to answers. Just notice what resonates, what surprises you, and what challenges an assumption that you may have held. So let your questions form quietly, and we will come back to them later. All right. So a few practical notes before we begin. This session is designed as a held conversation rather than a chat-driven webinar. So for that reason, we will not monitor the chat throughout. So if a question arises to you, I invite you to use the chat function for the question, and it allows me to gather and curate questions later in the Q&A. We will have a 10-minute Q&A that might be a little bit longer depending on the energy and the passion that we find there. So you're welcome to take notes, to reflect, or simply listen. Listening is already participation. And at the end of the conversation, we will bring in as many voices as possible. I see that a lot of people joined us live. If you are here watching the replay and you have questions, please connect with one of us. I will introduce everybody here involved today. Connect with us directly via LinkedIn, via the website. All the contact information will be available. So let me briefly introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, I am Helena de Monk, and I work as a holistic, women-centered leadership coach and facilitator. And for more than 20 years, I've worked with women leaders, executives, and organizations across sectors and countries. What I've learned over the years is that leadership transitions are rarely just professional. They touch identity, authority, confidence, and the stories we tell ourselves about who we are allowed to become. I became interested in matrescence not because it's a women's issue, but because it's one of the most underestimated leadership transitions of adult life, and one that organizations are still remarkably unprepared to recognize, let alone support. I'm also board member of GlobalWo.MenHub, organizer of this webinar, where I see every day how deeply interconnected women's health, leadership, and systemic change really are. My role today is not to teach or to convince, but to hold the arc of the conversation, to ask the questions that help us see clearly what is often rushed, silenced, or misunderstood. And I'm very glad not to be holding this conversation alone. So let me introduce the three amazing women that will be here sharing their expertise and knowledge and experience. I'd like to start by introducing Roberta Nicotra. Roberta is the co-founder of Luna Lab, a social initiative supporting women and organizations through the transition of motherhood. She brings a rare combination of policy expertise, leadership development, and lived experience, shaped by years working within international and European institutions. What makes Roberta's voice particularly important is her ability to articulate matrescence not as a personal issue, but as a 360-degree developmental process, one that reshapes leadership capacity, decision-making, empathy, and responsibility. She challenges the idea that motherhood is a detour and instead invites us to see how depth, clarity, and authority are often forged through disruption. Welcome, Roberta. I'm so happy to have you here. Next, we have Agatha Spisou. Agatha is also a co-founder of Luna Lab and brings another essential dimension to this conversation. With a background in strategic communications and public affairs, combined with coaching, mindfulness, and stress regulation work, Agatha operates at the intersection of inner experience and organizational reality. She speaks honestly about the invisible cost of doing it all, the mental load, the pressure, and the silent trade-offs many mothers make without naming them. Agatha reminds us that growth doesn't come from heroics, but from support systems that actually work. Welcome, Agatha. It's an honor to have you here. And finally, I'm so happy to welcome Flora de Maagd. Flora is an art dance therapist and social entrepreneur working with women and mothers through the body, movement, and collective spaces of expression. She brings something almost absent from professional conversations, the physical and embodied reality of matrescence. Through her work in perinatal dance theory, Flora shows how identity shifts are lived not only in the mind or emotions, but deeply in the body, and how regulation, safety, and expression are foundations for well-being and leadership. Together, these three women bring complementary perspectives: identity, systems, leadership, the body, and lived experience. So welcome, Flora. Welcome everybody here, live and in the replays. Let's begin. Flora, I would like to start with you, if that is okay. When you speak about matrescence, you often return to identity. The moment realizes she's no longer who she was, but yet doesn't yet know who she's becoming. So if you had to help somebody feel that identity shift, not understand it intellectually, but feel it, where would you start?
Thank you so much, Elena. And thank you everyone for joining. And thank you for this great question that also brings us to another level. It's not only an intellectual conversation, it's a full body engagement that we're going to experience here today. Also because matrescence and becoming a mother is a fully embodied experience. And to start with, to respond to your question, I would like to invite you and you ask what I would say to that person. So if that person were you, dear Helena, I would like you to take a big breath in and to take a big
Let's
breath.
all do this.
Let's all do this together. Exactly. We're behind our screens, but it's not because it's digital that we don't also have a full body behind. So you can really take that time to maybe ground your feet also, if you're seated on a chair, and maybe even close your eyes if you feel like it today. And you can take a big breath in through your nose and a deep breath out all the way until you feel some sort of tension down in your belly. You can start to breathe in again and breathe out entirely. And at the end of your breath out, you may feel some tension right at the core. And this is where is your center of gravity. And I invite you to connect to that center of gravity, that little, as if it was a little bullet or a little point of tension. And this is also where your essence is and where everything started when you became a mother. And I invite you to feel and to experience that this place within the womb is not only the place of creation, but also the place of intuition. And becoming a mother is no longer about thinking your action and engaging your brain to become active or to lead, but it's about following an intuition, a deep, creative, and embodied feeling down in your belly and throughout your entire body. So if you're okay now, you can open your eyes again. And through that feeling, I hope you can understand that matrescence is an embodied experiment. It is one of unity that we're always thriving for, because becoming a mother may also feel, many of us have this feeling of disconnection or of having various identities clashing with each other, but we are called for this unity, and talking about matrescence hopefully can all help us reach that inside, inner, and embodied unity.
Beautiful. Thank you so much also for having us, sharing that experience and bringing us really with the body in this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Elena.
Roberta, you said that matrescence is not one transition, but many happening all at once, and that this complexity is often mistaken for personal failure. So, what changes for a woman the moment that this transition is named or labeled?
It's about giving the language to validate what is going on. As you introduced, Lina, this is a complex shift of identity that entails also a physical, a psychological, emotional, and a social component, and they are all interconnected. And sometimes we of course, especially today through social media, we tend to compare our experiences and to share perhaps the bright side, while all these changes that are happening make us feel isolated in a certain sense. And this is where knowing what is going on and that it's the developmental stage. It's simply human, and it's part of the human experience, and it's part of being a woman. And we all, independently from our own experience and challenges and our own perspective and our unique way of living motherhood and matrescence as a transition, we all feel overwhelmed. We all struggle. And there are reasons for that are deeply rooted in science and societal structure and the pressure that we receive, trying to combine the emotional complexity of really juggling work and motherhood at the same time. Yes, it does give you the language to feel less isolated, to validate yourself, to cultivate self-understanding and self-compassion, which is at the core of thriving for every individual. So
Yeah.
this is
What is one transition that women often don't dare to speak out, or what just does remain unspoken in that transition?
This is, to be honest, it's very personal. I can speak about my own experience. There are certainly physical changes that are mostly obvious, and there are physical changes that remain a taboo. And my own experience of matrescence was particularly complex the second time around because I survivor of obstetric violence and I endured a long-lasting physical trauma after the birth of my second child. And this is not something that is affecting everybody, absolutely not. And it's actually in Europe is one woman out of three, considering also Eastern Europe. And in Belgium is one woman out of four who has a traumatic experience of birth. And only a small percentage of these, but a substantial amount of women, number of women, like approximately 200,000 every year in Europe, experience long-lasting physical trauma. And this affects bodily parts that are very intimate. And functioning that is linked to bowel movement and sexual reproductive functionality. And this is very difficult to share. Simply, it's difficult right now for me. My body language tells you something, I guess. I personally had to go through years of psychotherapy to sustain the burden of PTSD. I am in a lawsuit. And it was extremely difficult for me, particularly to go back to work. But as I said, the silence is part of the problem. Silence is really part of the issue of not, it really slows down societal progress in this sense. And I think we are in an age where we should start speaking more freely about what motherhood entails sometimes. A complete disruption that even if it's supported, in my case it's particularly extreme, but I'm saying in general, motherhood brings back trauma as well because the fact of being a mother makes you questioning the relationship that you had with your own caregivers when growing up, and this brings a layered trauma up to the surface, and it's much more complex than what it is actually, and very much underestimated, especially in the workplace. So if we are serious about mental health, the importance of mental health, and also about gender equity, we need to discuss these themes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Roberta, for sharing this experience. Because, like you say, there's a lot of things that are not named, that are taboo, that women feel like there's no space or no safe space to bring this up. And as you have talked about all these different layers of what is activated basically by giving birth and by becoming a mother in bodily, ancestral relationship with your own parents, and maybe even deeper emotional, they're practical and logistical, don't even they're random if you look at all the other transitions. So it is so important to, although you say that your experience was extreme, but still it is so important to normalize these experiences so women don't feel alone. And also partners and leaders, managers, HR is aware of this large transition so they can also try to understand and maybe offer some space or invite the women to share some of these elements in case they have an impact also on the professional and the performing. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, Agathe, you speak a lot about normalizing the inner experience of matrescence, what we're trying to do here. What do you see happening when women realize that what they are experiencing is normal, is developmental, and not dysfunctional?
Thank you. And thank you to my previous two speakers to set the scene on what matrescence is. And I think we spoke about this very importance of noticing what's happening to us, of understanding it, and of normalizing it. And once we do that, there's another step of reframing that experience into something positive, into something about growth. And this doesn't diminish at all the fact that it can be complex, it's challenging, it's multi-layered. There is really a lot of things that we have to go through. But I think in the moment that we look at this experience as the opportunity to grow, even as Roberta mentioned, you can really learn about yourself, about your history, about your shadows. We can connect back to our bodies and see we're born a new version of ourselves after we give birth. So there's lots of opportunities. So seeing it as an opportunity to grow rather than setback, gap in our CV, and only challenge, it's very beneficial. The moment we start to reframe that and we see the daily experience beyond changing pampers and so on, to growing to a new version of ourselves, more empathetic, more present in the moment, problem solving, conflict resolution, there's a lot of, we notice ourselves at different capacities, different leadership skills that we are practicing while being taking care of another human being. The moment we understand it ourselves as moms, we become more confident about it and we can communicate that to the society, for example, at workplace. So I think it's very important that we start with ourselves. I'm not saying that's the only layer. We have to obviously also look at the system, at the culture, at the context we're living in. But the moment we own this transition, we reframe it into an opportunity to grow, we become more confident and we're able to communicate more about it and ask for the support system needed.
Thank you. So, in general, I'm addressing the three of you. What language do you wish that every mother already had for this phase?
For me, is growth. So growth at 360 degrees. Also growth, because leadership is often misunderstood. When you think about leadership, especially in the corporate environment, you think about senior management positions, but we know instead that leadership is about self-awareness, and motherhood really puts you in front of a mirror and gives you the opportunity to really look into who you are, into who you want to become. And again, every growth and every experience is different. But as we have this, as we always preach with Agatha and in our community and beyond, there are a lot of transferable skills that comes with motherhood. And of course, when you are in the moment, when you are in the challenge, it is difficult to discern what is it that we are growing. But it's also about reframing and seeing it with a growth mindset approach. I'm not sure if you are familiar with this concept, but it's really about gaining that insight that allows you to use it as growth also in your professional environment, because you grow skills that we have already mentioned, like emotional intelligence, empathy, that are no soft at all. They are called soft skills, but they are just what is not going to be replaced by artificial intelligence, and what it is much more needed to create more inclusive and sustainable working cultures. And this is because our society doesn't place so much value in care. The more we have modernized and industrialized our societies, actually care it's at the core of the human experience. And it is, leadership is about care. It's about applying your strength in service of others. And that's where motherhood meets leadership.
Beautiful.
I
Fran,
jump on
your
that,
thoughts?
Roberta, because you stole the word I exactly wanted to use, a language of care. I wish mothers and managers and team leaders can have this way to communicate that is caring with one another. So that includes, of course, empathy and compassion for everyone's stories, which are so unique and different to one another. And also to recognize the vulnerability behind the new mother, but also behind a team or a setting or an environment that is not necessarily aware, that doesn't necessarily have the resources to put the right structure in place. We'll talk about the system change, I think, in the next part of our conversation. But yeah, a language of care that recognizes the vulnerability, and vulnerability also as a huge talent to have more human women-centered ways of doing business and working in companies.
I wanted to complement with maybe just a word that was already mentioned. We're talking about the growth, about care, and the support. So for me, that's 3 levels that it's needed for this to really be beneficial for both, for the mom and for the organizations and the society, of course.
Beautiful. So as you listen, please notice where you recognized yourself or someone you work with in what has been described by these 3 beautiful ladies. And check for yourself what feels named, what comes up for you as something conscious for the first time. Just let this land, take some notes, write something in the chat if you want. It's just a moment for you to absorb everything, because a lot has been said, a lot of layers have been shared with you. And what stands out is how much of this transition remains invisible, even when women themselves are already doing enormous inner work, like a lot of us. And that brings us to what happens when this invisible transition meets workplaces and systems that, let's be honest, were never designed to see it. So, Roberta, you've been very clear that one of the biggest misunderstandings at work is the expectation of linearity, the idea that a woman simply returns after a maternity leave. What does this expectation completely fail to see?
So we have talked about the complexity of balancing motherhood and career at the same time. And if we are serious about discussing themes around gender equity, pay gap, which still in Europe affects women earn 14% less than men. And if you're serious about talking also about pension gaps and about more women in leadership pipelines, which research shows affects diversity and inclusion, which in turn affects also performance and innovation. If we're serious about all of these, and we need to understand that the focus must be placed on reintegration, on effective intervention on reintegration. Because, okay, transition to motherhood needs temporary adjustments, of course. It needs flexibility. It needs also wide, more important, parental leave also for men. And actually parental leave that men take, because unfortunately the reality is that men do not take the leave even if it's given, because it's not accepted society from the working culture, from no, we cannot generalize, but in most companies and in most working environments. And also we are very much aware that the situation varies based on the country, based on the industry. But we know that we need all of that, but we also know that we need this structured support for mothers to come back, because motherhood, it's one of the most important points, if not the most important inflection point in a woman's career. Let me think 1 second, because I'm not sure if I replied to your question. It was like, what does this expectation of linearity, because it's expected that our bodies and our identity just sync back with the calendar. Okay, let's now maternity leave is ended and let's go all back to business as before. And this is clearly not the case. And we know that as our co-workers know that, our partners know that, our managers know that. And that's why motherhood at the end of the day is treated as a setback, it's treated as a limitation in the professional environment. We simply think it's not, because it fits supported. We know there is actually a growing body of research that shows that to navigate the stigma, the societal expectations, and this emotional complexity that comes from this balancing career and motherhood, structured support, peer groups, and mental health support, and it's really the answer. And I hope I replied to your question, Helena. There are a lot of concepts coming into when we speak about linearity and motherhood. There is nothing linear in motherhood. There is nothing linear in the human experience as such.
Thank you for sharing that. I think we are really touching people's experiences and my own experience. I do a lot of parental transition coaching, and my own experience with this linearity is that both the mother is forced into this mindset and thinking process of the system that she's working in. I'm talking international law firms, international banks, things like that. This is your date where you are on leave. This is the date when you return. And then it is about how do you return? Not understanding that there will be more women, more leadership returning. Instead, they think of, okay, we will have flexibility issues, we will have hormonal disruption issues, things like that. There's a lot of pre-setting where some of these things might happen, but then again, they're ignored, or they're a taboo to talk about, both for the women or HR or their N+1. But also they are ignoring what capacity these women are bringing as mothers in terms of what they have experienced and learned during their first stage of parenthood. So how do you see that? Agatha, any ideas on that?
So in terms of the problems or more of the solutions in the...
I would say the linearity that is there. Yeah, I guess everybody can imagine the problems. Let's look solutions. Yeah, let's talk solutions.
But I think before also to understand or change this concept of linearity is also, again, remembering the differences that we are all experiencing in this journey. And also that for everybody it's a different type of going back, and depending how many kids you have, what situation you're in. As an expat community, the traditional support system is lacking. And surely in terms of work reintegration, we have to remember about the hidden costs of this process. When we try to go back to work linearity, in a sense, like bouncing back to where I was before, the baby just happened to be, we just created a human being from nowhere, but let's just go back to where it was, to the ambitious, to the ever-present person, 100% productive and performing as before. Obviously, that's not possible. So we really need to think about the costs of all that unseen changes and the changes that are not understood, the mental load that women are carrying in also coming back. It's not only going back to the office, in the same time, the emotional weight of leaving the child, for example, in childcare, the guilt, the planning, making sure you have that artificial support system, because we don't live in an era where there's a village to support us to raise a child as it should be, and it was. So for me, there is a lot of those hidden and unseen elements of going back to work that basically have very strong effect on statistics as well. For example, 1 in 5 moms changes their career after their maternity. 2 in 3 mothers in Europe, and this is statistics from Make Mothers Matter report that was recently done. 2 in 3 mothers say that motherhood negatively affected their career. Around 50% struggle with mental health. So there is a reason for that. So we cannot have a linear back as it was, back to where I left it off. It really needs a clear support system, phased plan, understanding the stakeholders, prioritizing stakeholders, and really, adjusting the flexibility is also a very important element.
Absolutely. Now, it's not only the mental and emotional pressure, Flora. Professional environments rarely acknowledge the physical reality of postpartum and early motherhood. So what is the most ignored or misunderstood about the body during that transition?
Yeah, indeed. So thank you so much, Agatha, for underlying the emotional and the mental load and changes that it involves, but physically as well. Mothers returning to work are often suffering from a huge fatigue. Very few of them have proper nights. And we know how sleep deprivation, or the effects that could have on the brain, on the capacity to, on the attention, on the performance. Sleep deprivation is used as a means of torture in some countries. And so having a lack of sleep has a huge physical and mental effect on mothers. And according to that recent Austrian study, still 50% of new mothers up to 4 months after giving birth still experience excessive sleepiness. So it's really not, it's a common issue that many women face. And actually, when mothers come to my dance classes during their maternity leave, they're so scared to go back to work because they're like, when am I going to take my naps? And it's a real worry for them because they know they need to sleep during the day. So that's one physical issue. Another one may be the pain. So Roberta shared with us her very impactful story about all the physical trauma that the birth had on her, but it's not an isolated case. Many mothers have traumatic birth experience. For me, the only image that came to my mind after giving birth was I got run over by a bus. I know this sounds a bit extreme, but talking about it in mother circles, I know other moms also felt like this. So this is as traumatic of a physical experience as being run over by a bus. So you can totally imagine that 3 months or 4 months of maternity leave is not enough to fully recover and to be up to speed in a work environment that is very speedy with a lot of tensions. And last but not least, there is also the entire body image that changes. Many mothers are just don't feel good in their body anymore. Many come to my dance classes and say, I don't recognize myself. And the weight they gained, the shape that changed has a huge impact on their self-confidence. So it's the feeling and the pain that you may suffer in your body, but also the image you have on your body that has a huge effect on you performing in a work environment. And maybe just the last one on that, because for me, I am one of those 1 in 5 moms who change careers after giving birth. So after the birth of my second child, I left my career in international affairs to become a dance therapist for women and mothers. And that change also happened because physically it was no longer possible for me to sit behind a screen for 8 hours per day. And it's also the impact of COVID and everything coming digital, but just having Zoom calls, sitting on a chair all day long was just not what I needed. I needed movement. I needed to move. I needed in-person contacts as well. And this very just physical need had an influence on the job that I chose to transition to.
Wow. Yeah. This physical, this emotional, this mental changes, they're actually like a reorganization of priorities, of load, and they are very often read as reduced ambition. This is also something that I hear very often. So I would like to invite the three of you, but also the audience, just to think of what does this misunderstanding look like in everyday work moments, like meetings or meeting times, deadlines, performance expectations. Agatha, Roberta, what do you experience in the work that you do and the advice that you give with Luna Lab in that area?
Motherhood is perceived both internally and externally as reduced ambition or a lack of focus, while we know it very well, and the mothers are not less ambitious. Not all of a sudden they become less ambitious. They are simply less supported, and because the work has been designed by man for man, and this is history that tells us we know how we arrived to here, and what the role of caregivers we always had for also biological reasons. But yeah, this is just the translation of this enormous increase in mental load that we have discussed. This is especially it's true not just for women, it's true also for men, because men are increasingly more, and they should be more involved in caring. It's also particularly true for the sandwich generation, so those that at one point in their life find themselves caring for both their kids and their aging parents. So it's it's a conversation that has to go around care, especially now here we are today here discussing about matrescence and discussing the particularly strong impact that it has on mothers. But what we see is that the perception goes against us, because we ourselves perceive it as a disruption. We still want to have kids. We do contribute to economy by doing that, and so we have a very important role in society. But the narrative around care is simply not in our favor, in the favor of the human being, let's say, in more general, because it also interests partners, not just women.
I think, if I may add on, I think it's also not so much defining the ambition. No, it's how you define the ambition. It's not that we're less ambitious, it's just our priorities shifts and what we regard as a success. I think in our work, we very much emphasize the concept of redefining success through matrescence. And I think that's a key question to ask yourself in that moment. What does success look like for me now, professionally, personally, with my friends, in all kind of areas of our life? And that definition will keep changing. So I think if we really truly want to understand the ambition to be present, the ambition to nurture others, the ambition, we continue to be very ambitious. We're actually overly ambitious to basically tick all the boxes. The problem is if we measure that ambition in terms of productivity, 100% performance, showing up in networking events in the bedtime moment, we just have to, for ourselves, because I have to say that's not only the problem of societal pressure. To some extent, it's put on us, but we put it on ourselves as well. So we also feel like we're less ambitious, or we judge ourselves that now we have this gap in CV, now we stopped and we compare ourselves with the others that continue growing in the professional career. But I think if we look at the word ambition in a different definition, I think we still are very ambitious.
Yes, I completely agree. And I just wanted to say something, of course, because indeed, this is not the case for everybody. Not everybody can stop and reflect on what is going on. And Agatha came back 3 times to work. The second time around, I could not because it was physically impossible. I had to have multiple surgeries, and I still am 5 years on with the physical consequences and condition. But when I went back the first time around, when I was actually relatively young, 28, 29, I was, what is going on with me? I was such an ambitious. I left home when I was 18. I just learned languages, had a lot of experiences in working experience in international organizations around the world. And I was like always on the go, always. And then all of a sudden you are like, okay, this is not working. And this is not working as before. And it's also the expectation that we do place in ourselves, as Agatha said. It's really, perhaps this is what we see as the stronger drive of self-disruption, let's say, because it comes with a huge weight to think that we can have it all. Yes, we can, but not at the same time. So that's what we always discuss with our women. You can have it all, but you need to pick. You cannot have it all at the same time, which doesn't mean, because it depends always where is your starting point, what is your situation. That's why it's very important to work on a very personal level. So these peer groups are very important because they give the opportunity to not really feel less alone and understand that despite what is your unique perspective, despite what are your incredible challenges, they will be always different from another mom, but they still give you the same type of emotions, let's say, the same type of feeling lost and needing to recombine, reintegrate, rethink your way of being a professional and a mother at the same time. But again, it's also very important to have a targeted personal approach to discuss growth on a more personal level. That's for sure what we have seen.
A lot of
Maybe, Elena,
Food for thought.
If I can just add one thing to that notion of success. Just wanted to highlight once more that every motherhood experience is different, and even for as a mother, depending on the child, it depends so much on the experience of the birth and the experience of the child. For me, I was a mother at 24, and my baby was so easy, and my return to work was so easy. I actually felt more powerful, more accomplished as a woman. I was working until 6, like the very limit of the daycare, but my baby was super happy at creche. So it all went super well. I was continuing my career at the UN and it all went super well. And I actually had a colleague who had told me, yeah, I actually tend to prefer hiring mothers because they're so efficient. And he was so, in his experience, he really noticed that mothers are targeted, they're straight to the point, they're not going to lose time at work. They know they have another life afterwards. So they're actually super productive. And that was a real encouragement for me. And I totally, like that first child didn't hit me during my career at all. And so the career change happened after the second child because it was a premature birth, the more traumatic experience then. But so every story is different. And also on the notion of success, I think we could rather frame it as and question ourselves, are we looking for success or are we looking for impact? And when I changed that narrative and asked myself, I don't want success just for the grade and have a good something that looks good for the honors or whatever. I just want to have a real impact. And that's why I started to work at the international level to change the rules of the games. But then eventually I realized that an impact is huge also when you work on a personal level. When you raise a kid, it's huge. When you work in your neighborhood, when you do something that nourishes you, your family, and your community. So it's just another way of framing what we mean by success, and framing it in terms of impact may be helpful in order to feel more comfortable with the work choices that we do.
Thank you so much. Very powerful contributions and a lot of food for thought. I would like to address the audience here to think of this in your capacity as leader or HR professional or entrepreneur, and let land what is one assumption that you would question based on what you have been hearing here. And I think it was Roberta who already made a very nice bridge to our next topic. That is that, first of all, what becomes clear is that the problem is not the motherhood itself, but the mismatch between what this transition requires and what our systems currently offer. But yet something else is present too. This transition doesn't only take, there's not only a cost, it also grows something. I would say it grows a lot. And I am very eager to dive a little bit deeper into that growth potential, into that leadership capacity, into the value. And as I said, if you jumped in later, there is a full replay. If you have to go, don't worry. The replay will be available for you. If you have questions, put them in the chat. We will deal with them in a minute. But let's look a little bit more at these growth possibilities. Agatha, you have described how motherhood reshaped your relationship with stress and priorities and confidence. So what kind of leadership capacity do you see emerge when women are properly supported?
Thank you. So I think we touched upon a bit the concepts of reframing the experience, seeing what we practice throughout motherhood as these transferable skills. And there's a lot. There has been actually a study in US to categorize that, and it's 18 categories that came up in terms of capacities and skills collected through unpaid care work, where obviously motherhood is one of the most prominent one. Thinking about my own experience, yes, I think I can resonate very much with Flora's first kind of experience with, so I have 3 children and I came back to work 3 times. And the first 2 times, it was exactly like that. I felt way more productive, way more confident. Actually, this was a moment where I got promoted. I had clarity and prioritized. You had to get organized as well. And before that, I have to say, I was stressing a lot. I would have a lot of imposter syndrome, not trusting my judgment, my intuition. And having a child really puts that in perspective. You just created a human being. From you comes a new human being. You put things in perspective. A deadline there or somebody's moody comment doesn't affect you to the same extent. You tend to put things in a different perspective. So that helped me a lot. And I really saw a new version of myself coming back to work. I had very short times back at work because I was always like, actually with my second one, I came back to work already pregnant with my second child. So my experiences in between were very short. And I think this is why it also worked. And then after my third child, it started hitting me. And I don't think it's so much in terms of having the three child. I think the first child changes your life and the kind of more you have is more logistics. Obviously, depends on the experience. Obviously, depends on the type of experiences you were going through. But just as an idea of number, it wasn't the number of the children. It was what happened to me. I think it hit me after the third one. I felt that it was too much. I was putting too much pressure on myself. I was trying to do everything by myself and so on. So back to the growth concept, you bring a lot of new skills or so much more practiced skills in real scenarios and developed skills back to work, but you need that support and understanding. I cannot be more clear about that. And I felt that I didn't have that in the third situation. And I think maybe to summarize the capacities, the leadership capacities, we call it generative, maternal type of leadership. So it's not only connected to mothers, it's very much something that caregivers or any person can learn, and I think is so much needed in today's society. So it's about nurturing, empowering, and giving space for autonomous and trust for the autonomous work. And I think moms are quite good at that.
Thank you so much, Agata. Flora, through your work, women reconnect with themselves through regulation and expression. So what inner resources do you see being reclaimed? I would say leadership resources, reclaimed or developed through matrescence.
Yeah. Maybe one of them is creativity. Creativity, because you constantly need to think outside the box when you're a mother. You face challenges every day, you need to negotiate every day, but there is no dead end. There must be a solution. So that creativity, that the connection that we did at the beginning is also about following your intuition and not only thinking strategically what should be interesting next, but it's really about feeling it and creating new solutions. And creativity is very much linked to innovation. So in that sense, having innovative leaders with a vision, with always able to find opportunities, and also that, as Agatha said, that capacity to step back and put things in perspective is a huge talent for leaders. Creativity, and maybe another one would be courage. I prefer courage than resilience, but it means the same. It's that capacity to always go back to it, and that inner strength. I think I like courage because there is also this sense of trusting in the future and never giving back. So yeah, that inner power, resilience, and courage that mothers develop are huge assets for leaders.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Now, when we look at growth, there's a reality check there as well. There is a difference between the growth that is earned through matrescence and growth that is forced through the system. Roberta, your take on that?
Again, I think I put the seed before of this, and it's because I'm a strong believer that no matter what experience you had, motherhood really. And there is a book I can recommend you about this, which is actually called Matrescence. But I'm really a strong believer that motherhood really creates that, and as I said, in my particular experience, this that also meant empathy towards women suffering in general, and this silence, which is often carried in silence. And because again, I see my condition, and I saw my condition, and I felt my condition as unfortunate. even though I was rationally thinking, but my child is alive and everybody was telling me just from the moment, day 4, when I had to run back to emergency, but your child is well. And this is really important after all, like, first of all, actually, for a mother. I think when you have anything, when your child is the one which is hurt in the process of giving life, it's always worse. But who has to take care of the child? The mother. So it's and so many women, as I mentioned before, is like approximately every year 200,000 women in Europe, and we are seeing most of our health systems work well, and we still have these experiences, and a lot of women go through that. So in my own experience, it really creates an incredible I feel others much more, and I am able to listen much more and try to really give space to others. And this is something that in any working environment, it's actually crucial to communication, first of all. And yeah, this is my own version of maternal leadership, and every one of us will have their own, because the transition to motherhood will have taught you something else, and it's about valuing these lessons and applying them to your real life and owning it, as Agatha really owned her going back to work. I didn't at all. I didn't recognize myself at work. I was like, this is not me. I was so passionate about geopolitics and other issues, and what is my passion now? Where is it? Where did it go? And Flora said it very well. This is the impact, the difference between success, whatever you define as your own success based on who you are, your experiences, your character and everything, and the difference with impact, the impact you can actually make in your own working environment. And that's leadership again.
Beautiful. I would like to invite the audience to think for themselves what leadership qualities they hear emerging here, and also how you recognize them, how you reward them, or how you maybe overlook them in your capacity as a mother, as a leader, as an HR professional. I think it's very clear that matrescence is a developmental passage, one that reshapes identity, leadership, and how women relate to work and authority. And no, we would like to open the floor, because probably as you've been listening, questions have formed from your own experience, from your role as a leader or a professional, or from something completely different that we might not have touched. And I know that we have not brought solutions here. We have created awareness. We have tried to normalize experiences and realities. And I would invite you, if you want to go deeper, connect with Flora, connect with Agatha, connect with Roberta. All the connection information will be available to you. Also, if you have questions that you don't feel confident to put here in the Q&A or in the chat, that's also okay. Just address them directly in all confidence and privacy and safety. Would like to
Something
bring
that has struck my attention. I turn this question to you because the thing is, there are different perspectives, and I wanted to add something about vulnerability, because we are here in a space in which we feel more or less, because we don't know each other, safe to be vulnerable. This is what we need. Honestly, there is no one solution fits all. There are a lot of interventions that need to be done at the governmental, like at the societal level, just to make it, generalize it, and as from the companies themselves to work on their culture, working culture and environment. But what is very crucial is to have a space also in the professional setting to feel vulnerable, to share vulnerability, because also vulnerability is part of leadership. And going through motherhood, like going through other life stages, makes us human, just more human, and makes us vulnerable. And sharing this vulnerability gives us the permission to be ourselves and connect with others. It improves also connection in your workplace. So it is of course, just it seems like a dream. Yeah, just I go and I have a space in my workplace to be vulnerable. No, but you can actually create and do this intervention in the workplaces. We can, of course, discuss more about what we have created with Luna Lab and everything. If you connect with us, we can explain you how we actually do help organization and moms. But what I really see here from the comment also was this inability to be vulnerable, I perceived, and also this inability to pause. Because there was a lady particularly that has written that this has really caught my attention at the beginning, that of course it all starts with self-awareness. Yes, here, that actually becoming a mother meant the end of her growing company.
I must say, this also struck me, the comment and the question. Thank you so much for that, because it is actually a level that we did not really touch. And that is, what if you are not an employee? What if you're not an executive working at corporate, but you're an entrepreneur? And it's funny because I am one. Basically, all of us here in the panel are entrepreneurs. And it is still a different situation because a lot of systemic safety nets are not there when you are an entrepreneur. There's a different accountability, responsibility, or at least the perception of that. I know, and I tend to be proud of that. And no, I'm not going to say ashamed of that, but the proudness is gone. I was back at the office. I was an entrepreneur. I had 7 or 8 people on my payroll. I thought that I was unmissable, and I was back at the office when my baby was 6 weeks old. And I took him with me. I breastfeeded for 2.5 months. I had an adorable, perfect baby in terms of sleeping and feeding, but I was back after 6 weeks. And for me, that was like, as an entrepreneur overachiever, that was like evident. And some people say, are you sure that's a good thing to do? And I know that I would do that differently right now. But at that time, as an entrepreneur, I felt that responsibility to be there. I think that leaders in organizations sometimes also have that feeling like they cannot be missed, right? That they leave their team. But still, as entrepreneurs, we do not have all these HR policies, and even financially, there's a big difference. Thank you so much for bringing that up, because this is also a very important context, and I would say pressure that is systemically put upon us as mothers when we are entrepreneurs. Anybody wants to add something here or reframe this?
I think it just puts even more importance on the conversations we have today. I think my take on this, we are quite fresh on the panel. We are the fresh entrepreneurs here. And it was a bit by choice, by necessity, depends how you look at that. And there is this hope for a bit more flexibility, a bit more. It always depends, of course, also on your system you're in, because obviously that's very important whether you can. So I think whether it's entrepreneurship or going back to corporate world, it very much depends what environment you're coming back to. And for sure, yes, it depends what support system you provided yourself ahead of going to that. I hear a lot now, for example, in social media, the aware moms, let's say, trying to plan it in advance and put in system of co-CEOs and all. But it very much depends on your situation, on your possibilities, financial possibilities. So I think it's a very complex process. And I think I was one of the ones and it still didn't work. I'm not saying that's the only, but you said if I would know, if it would be normalized, I might have acted differently. So this is where I referred to. Absolutely. I'm not saying that you can expect what could happen to you and what is the process there. I think I just wanted to say that it very much depends on the situation you're going back to. Whether the employer, if you're in a if you're an employee, if your employer, your boss, your manager, your team, if there is slight awareness and willingness to support this process back, I think there is lots of things we can do. So it's very much also based on very much the people you have around you. And if you're a solo entrepreneur, yes, it's something that, yeah, it's a lot of challenges, but and the society we're living in is doesn't really have fallback and support systems yet ready. But I think that's why the conversation today is needed, to see that pause, that not as a pause, not as a break and relaxed leave on holidays to be nicely with your kid. It's a societal and systemic
Culture change that
Sorry?
needs to operate. Culture change.
Cultural change.
Exactly, as you
Yeah.
said, it's moving from, so one support system around you is key, but then it's about a systemic and entire social culture change, because the stereotypes didn't come necessarily from your colleagues. It came from TV, it came from social media, it came from memories from older generations. So it's much bigger than that. And having that external pressure is so intense on every one of us. And that's why the shift should come from within. I have that image of, if you put a lot of pressure on something that has nothing inside, it's going to get squeezed. But if it's strong enough from the inside, if it has consistency, nothing can really squeeze it or make it change its form. And I think maybe we're all invited as women, not only as mothers, because I think this is all also a bigger issue on gender stereotypes, on gender inequalities, but having that kind of capacity to build that inner strength and that inner confidence, so that we're not too much affected by external advice or visions, but that we can really shape our own vision and decision. But I know that sounds very difficult, but I'm sure we are
It's a
all
process.
exactly, it's a
It's a
process.
life going process. It's never going to end. But if I want to, it is really that we need to stop treating matrescence as a problem, as an individual problem, but also as a problem. And this is why, honestly, my hope out of all this conversation that we are having since having engaged in this area, in this industry, whatever you want to call it, in this new category that we are trying to create, is planting a seed for this shift of narrative. And so please go. I hope that you come out of this conversation with this seed of, okay, this is not a problem. This is most certainly not an individual problem. This is a societal challenge that needs to be addressed with a redesigning workplaces, with also policies for sure. But as long as we as mother, we can also grow, as Flora says, our own awareness of what's going on, feel this space inside us. We will create this social progress that we so much long for. If
Yeah.
from the policies or from the one company at a time.
So as we come to an end, which we are right now, it is obvious that we cannot close with answers. So I would like to close with attention. So before we finish, I invite you to notice what stayed with you. Perhaps a sentence, perhaps a discomfort, or perhaps a recognition. But certainly what we did here is to give this a language. Matrescence is not a detour from leadership. It's a passage that reveals what leadership actually requires. And whether you are a mother or a leader or an HR professional or an ally, I saw that there was no single man here in the participants active. I hope some of you are watching the replay. This conversation invites a different responsibility, not to fix or optimize this transition, but to see it clearly and to allow our systems and expectations and language to mature alongside it. So thank you, Roberta Nicotra, Agatha Spiso, and Flora de Maagd for the depth and the courage. And thank you, listening in here, for the quality of your listening. Conversations like this, they do not end when the call ends. They will continue how we notice, how we question, and how we act differently afterwards. And thank you for being part of this one. Have a great rest of your day and rest of your week. Bye for now.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for participating.